future's in the air, can feel it everywhere.
Really, you are the first NSSF MD that's being respected and appreciated rather than vilified.
Well, I'm the first managing director of NSSF, also in recent times, to have completed their contracts and left without being handcuffed.
Yes, so congratulations.
Yes.
Good. So one of the things that I'd also like to talk about is the impact of the training that we did. So I worked very closely with you one-on-one. I even provided advice in terms of the parliamentary bill. I worked with the board, with the senior management team. I trained a very huge number of the top management, and we looked at various elements, including change management, etc. Now, tell me just briefly how you feel that work made a difference to NSSF.
Well, the thing is, it contributed to the shock element, right? Because everybody, when they are in their own situation, they are happy with it. They do not believe there is another way of doing it. And therefore, the training that you provided did, first of all, begin off with the shock element that today, if there was another company that was offering what NSSF currently provides, would lose 80% of our customers. It was clear, right? The people you had interviewed were people you found on the street, and that was pretty obvious to my colleagues and the senior management team that we were going to lose them. I'm sure they knew, but they didn't know. The second thing was you also came with a lot of examples about some of what the other companies in the world had done in response to changing environments. So for me, it then became very easy in the day-to-day management of the fund to refer to your training and continuously remind people that, guess what? If we as a company do not change the way we're doing business, if we as a company do not appreciate our customers, it doesn't matter, how much the minister thinks about us. It doesn't matter what the board thinks about us. It doesn't matter what senior management thinks about us. What really, really matters is what the customers think and how we are providing the service to them. So for me, that training that you provided, that interaction, that shock element that you provided to my colleagues was quite important in making sure that I had a much easier role in trying to convince my colleagues to actually change and also to point them in the right direction.
And do you feel that it did create a real change in the overall perception?
Well, I think it did, right, I did. It also made it very easy for us to deal with some of the resistance that we had, especially with some of the senior managers, which led to some of them actually leaving, which was not a regrettable loss. And therefore, for me, it did help in articulating our cause and also improving on the mission that we had of trying to transform and turn around the fund to what I believe is now a good institution that provides a reasonable service to the customer.
So I actually approached you even before you started with NSSF and gave you some materials on some of the elements that are very worthwhile doing before you start a major role like that. Now, in the first few months, you came up with a lot of terrific ideas that were very important for the company. You mentioned some of those, like changing both the name and the focus from compliance officer to relationship manager, and there are a number of other key components. You mentioned to me before the board meeting that you thought it was actually fairly unlikely that you'd get all the changes through. So what changed in terms of the work that I did? How did that actually shift the board and the decision that it actually ended up eventuating?
Well, what I think is that because of the dynamics of the board, right? Again, because of the shock element, because the fact that some of the board had not been involved in change management situations, some of the board had not gone through a situation whereby they were dealing with a company that was a government institution but wanted to have a private sector outlook. The training you provided helped change some of those minds. So it was quite obvious to the board and eventually to the rest of the team that we needed to make those changes, and therefore a lot of the changes that we're proposing were then supported after they had attended some of that training.
I actually came up with a new product which I call the unfair advantage, and it's essentially based on the work that I did for you.
Yeah.
Where what I'm now offering to other managing directors is that if there's a change that they want, or there's a perception that needs to be changed in the firm, as long as I feel that indeed it is in the advantage of the firm and of other staff, then I will actually create a training program. It might just be an hour, it could be longer, but I'll create a context in which the board or whatever team they're presenting to, or even customers, get to the point where it's like, well, yes, of course we have to do this. And so by getting people to come up with those ideas themselves, whether it's through discussions as part of a training, whether it's through the shock element of creating videos and processes and getting people to realize what needs to be done. The idea of this unfair advantage is that by working with the managing director and going through that process, whoever is being presented to the board or whomever, you can almost predict that they will go along with the ideas. So I should thank you for providing the context in which I was able to do that and come up with that new product.
Fantastic.
And very glad to hear that it did make a difference.
The future's in the air, can feel it.